Welcome to Saturday, week 23. The Gospel today tells us that only good fruit can come from good trees, and only bad fruit can come from bad trees. I should actually see the way around. Only good trees can produce good fruit. Doesn't mean to say they're always going to do that, but and we know that very well. There are fruit trees that produce good fruit. There are fruit trees that produce fruit that is not great to eat at all. The first reading from St. Paul's first letter to Timothy demonstrates from Paul's own confession that he was a bad tree producing bad fruit. He was persecuting the church. But God changed his life. He was changed from being a rotten tree to a good tree. And we know from even my limited gardening experience that it's possible to do things in order to improve the quality of a tree or a plant. In particular, pruning. Correct pruning can make a huge difference, can enable you to produce fantastic fruits. If you allow a tree or a bush just to go wild, then what it produces is not so good. If you look at any hedgerows where brambles grow, then the fruit that comes from them is usually very small and kind of fairly hard. Whereas if a thorn bush, bramble bush has been pruned properly right down to the very bottom, very similar to the pruning of vines, then it can produce good fruit, much bigger fruit, much more succulent. And the same's true of any type of fruit. I've got raspberries in my garden, and recently they've been quite savagely pruned to some extent, you might say. They're producing, or certainly did produce this year, fantastic fruit. The front of the garden, I've got a couple of apple trees and a plum tree. They're not so good. Well, the plums are excellent, but we don't get very many from it, and it's partly, I think, because of pruning. And the apples, one tree 1 year is quite good, and the other tree the next year it is all right, but very rarely do you get them both together. And this year there's quite a lot of fruit on one tree, but a lot of the apples don't look very good. A good gardener would presumably know how to rectify that, how to make a difference. And basically in our lives, God is a wonderful gardener. He can enable us to produce good fruit, often in ways that we don't understand. If a tree was able to speak, it would probably protest. Why are you cutting off my branch? That branch produced great fruit last year. Why are you cutting it off this year? Because it wouldn't understand. It's the same for ourselves. It's very hard to understand God's ways. God is all powerful, all knowing. How can we possibly understand his ways, his methods of pruning our lives? St. Paul did. He understood that being knocked off a horse, being blinded, meant that he could then be able to see clearly, to see the errors of his ways, and to see the ways in which he could recompense what he had done in the past by what he would do in the future, become a great preacher of the gospel. God's pruning in our lives can sometimes cause us to be baffled, and lots of people are totally baffled by it. Why does God do this? Why does God do that? The short answer is we do not know. God is all powerful. Sometimes we get a glimpse of his will, get a glimpse of why things are being done. And we can get that glimpse and that understanding when we look at our own lives. We cannot get it when we look at the lives of others. I can come to an understanding, as Paul came to an understanding, of why God did what he did. But we can't make that judgment on other people. God is the gardener. We are the tree. God prunes us in many, many different ways. Often we don't understand, but we can accept, because we can appreciate the fruit that we are able to bring into the world, the difference that we can make to our own lives and to the lives of others, because we have been pruned, because we have been changed. Our lives have been transformed, perhaps not as dramatically as St. Paul, from being the greatest persecutor to become the greatest preacher, from one extreme to another. But we are people who are pruned by God. We seek to understand that pruning. We seek to bring the fruit of that pruning into our lives and into our world. So thank you very much for watching. God bless.